Hello fellow survivors, and welcome to a campfire chat with me, Zach, and we're here to talk about the current state of the game. I'm going to be here a little while just reflecting on really where the Long Dark is right now and the latest DLC expansion, or rather the content patch, which was called Last Horizon, which came out on June 24th. And there's been a lot of stuff has happened since it came out. And there's been a lot of stuff added as well, and I figured we could take some time to just talk about it. And before I get into it, this is going to be a pretty easygoing video, just pretty much just me talking or maybe waffling on a little bit, giving some overview of what's happening and also some of my reflections. I don't have a script or notes or anything, I'm just going to wing it and spew out my thoughts really and what I think about this, and also inform you what's going on. So this is going to be more of a podcast thing. I might edit in a couple of visual things here and there if it's relevant. But if there was one video that you could just listen to if you wanted to, I probably would be this one, I guess. Because we have a lot to talk about. There's a lot of context to the things that we can discuss. Because we're talking about where the Long Dark is now and what's happened recently. Because right now we are in part 5 out of 6 of the DLC. I call it the DLC, it's not technically the DLC because every time one of these content patches come out, there's also all sorts of new stuff added to the base game as well. So it's better to call it the Tales really, but just for simplification I call it the DLC. In any case, though, before we get into what was actually added, let's just clarify one thing. People keep asking, well, when is the trader coming? When are they adding the trader and the safe house customization? Well, by natural deduction, if we have released 5 out of 6 patches, presumably it will all be in part 6, right? So everything that they promised they would add that has not been added must come next time, because there's 6 content patches in total, and they've now done 5. And also there is Wintermute in between. So episode 5 of Wintermute, they said, is coming out in late 2024. And if I had to guess, I could be wrong here, but if I had to guess, I think that the next content patch is actually Wintermute episode 5. And the last part 6, is probably going to be after that. So they can kind of focus on one thing at a time, unless they're different teams or something. So if I had to guess, and this is just a guess, I don't know, I haven't been told anything by Hinterland, but if I had to guess, episode 5 comes out in like November or something, and part 6 of the DLC comes out in like January, February 2025. That's what I would guess, but who knows? We have to see. Okay, so with all that said, we're going to talk a little bit about the Long Dark and the current content. So the Last Horizon was added on June 24th. And they added a whole bunch of stuff. They added the Cougar, which was really hyped. They added Cheat Death, which is a new dying mechanic or death mechanic. They added a new region, a new tail, and also they added a new misery mode, as well as some other minor things that I don't know if it's worth talking about. So there's a lot to cover here. I was also one of the playtesters for this. Or not for this content patch, but for misery mode, and I'll talk about that when we talk about misery mode. But first things first, we need to talk about the Cougar. This is probably the biggest topic in the Long Dark for a long time. Really, people have really up in arms about the Cougar, and I think I understand why. So if you're not up to date on what's going on, the Cougar was released in the content patch on June 24th, and then just a few days later, I think it was 5 days later, on June 28th, so that's like 4 days later, they removed it. They took it out of the patch. So the Cougar only survived for 4 days in the Long Dark. And the reason they took it away was because of quite a, not overwhelming, but a substantial amount of negative feedback from the community. And we're going to talk about that as well. So the Cougar, the way it worked when it was released, was that it was, some people called it more of an affliction than an actual animal. Because if you never encountered it or didn't watch my video on how the Cougar worked, you can get a rundown of it now. Basically, if you spend too much time in a region, the Cougar will take an interest in you and it will come into your region. Once it was in your region, there will be a music change, there will be this tension, there will be all these sounds, And then the Cougar could attack at any given time when you were outdoors. And the thing is, it was kind of random. You had no real control over this. It could just attack you at any given time. It could do severe damage to you and your clothing. And after the attack takes place, you have a small window of opportunity where you can kill the Cougar. And if you manage to kill the Cougar, you get its hide and its claw, and you can make a really good knife and a really good hat out of that. But if you don't kill the Cougar, it can come back very shortly after, and you'll probably die. This is a really, really high risk encounter. And that's basically how it worked. And the problem that people had with this was that there was very little interaction. There wasn't really a way to kill the Cougar before it attacked. The Cougar basically teleports on top of the player, and you have no way to prevent this from happening. And a lot of people didn't really like this. Now, to be fair, before we talk any more about it, a lot of people also did like how this Cougar was implemented. Both myself and another YouTuber called Hadrian, we both did polls in our communities to see what people thought about the Cougar. And actually the majority of people actually liked the Cougar and how it was implemented. And a lot of people also expressed disappointment when the Cougar was removed because they never had a chance to actually try it out. Although you can do it with time capsule and this sort of thing. So there were there was a small majority that actually liked the Cougar. But you have to keep in mind that even if we have a so-called, vocal minority, that the people who really hated it were the loudest, even if that was true, and most people actually liked the Cougar, I think it's fair to say that at least a quarter, or at least a third maybe, of all players in the Long Dark really did not like how the Cougar worked. And if you're a game developer and 1/3 of your player base are really disappointed, that's a significant number. And if you can then change it so that 1/3 is happy and the remaining 2/3 are the same or better, then maybe you take the opportunity. So I think that's why they removed it. They listened to player feedback, and it's important to note that they did listen. They took it away because of community feedback, because they want to change it. They want to make it better. They want to give something good to the community that we would enjoy. Now, it's also important to understand that there is a expectation or hype here that's also messing this up a little bit. So if you're not familiar with this, if you're less than 25 years old, you won't remember this, but those who are older, you remember when Phantom Menace came out, right? When Star Wars Episode 1 came out, and the hype was insane, and everyone was, oh my god, a new Star Wars movie. And then it comes out and it's like, oh, that wasn't so great, was it? Same thing with No Man's Sky. The massive hype for No Man's Sky. Everyone was so excited. Then the game came out and, oh wow, it is broken and terrible. But in the case of No Man's Sky, which is its own term really now, that got patched to oblivion, as we say. It was launched in a terrible state, really, but then they patched it insanely much for free to the extent that it became a really, really good game. And that meant that when we're talking about the Cougar, we're talking about a lot of hype, because the Cougar has been suggested as an addition to the Long Dark for a really, really long time. Like a really long time. You can find it in the early Milton mailbags that Hinterland had when they had little interactions with the forum members on their own forum back in like 5+ years ago. They talk about the Cougar as one of the things that they would like to add. So the idea of adding the Cougar to the game is a really, really old one. We're talking years and years. But that does not mean that they have spent years making the Cougar. It's just that they recently decided to really make it. But because it's been something that people have thought about for a long time, and developers also have hinted that they have thought about adding it for a long time, there's a lot of hype about it. So when they announced that the Cougar was going to be added, which was late 2022, so maybe a year and a half ago or a bit longer, the hype was really real, and they even added the prototype artwork for the Cougar at the time, so we knew what it would look like roughly. And we didn't know when it was going to be released, but there was a lot of hype. Oh god, we're getting a new animal, the Cougar's finally coming. And if you paid attention to the forums, you saw there was so much discussion about the Cougar, especially before Part 5 came out, because the developers had said in advance, more than a month in advance really, that the Cougar was coming in the next patch. So people started really discussing, how is the Cougar going to work? And people were mostly saying that it's probably going to be some sort of super predator that stalks you, and it's going to attack you from high altitudes. You'll probably only find it in like high elevation areas, like you find it in, well, now Sundered Pass, Hush River Valley, Ash Canyon. Those sort of places would have a Cougar. Some people even said, oh, I wonder if the ravine will have a Cougar. It won't be a safe zone anymore, you know. And so people had different ideas of how the Cougar would work. And then when the Cougar comes out, people have a massive hype for it. And when the release doesn't match that hype, people get massively disappointed compared to what they normally would be. And that's what creates all this negative feedback. That doesn't mean it's unjustified negative feedback, but that's the psychological reason why it's happening. That can also, if you're interested in psychology, it can actually lead to people saying good things about the Cougar when they don't necessarily mean it, because there's an effect called cognitive dissonance. This is when you have two conflicting opinions and they don't match. For example, you have a lot of hype for the Cougar, so you're very positive about it. Then the Cougar comes out and you don't like it, but you can't like it and dislike it at the same time. So you choose one and you basically convince yourself that the Cougar was good, and you say, actually, I really like the Cougar, because otherwise there's like a conflict of interest in your mind. Basically, that's how that works. The way people want the Cougar to work is pretty straightforward. So I released 2 Cougar videos on my channel, and between those 2 and a poll I did, I've seen thousands of comments by now on how the Cougar works. And people have very different opinions and different details on what they think the Cougar should be. But really, it's pretty straightforward, because it all boils down to the same thing. The vast majority of people who complain about the Cougar, what they really want is an ability to interact with the Cougar prior to its attack. So if everything was the same as it is now, most people want to be able to see the Cougar coming. This could be achieved in many different ways. The most common suggestion that people made in a variety of versions was that instead of the Cougar just teleporting on you and suddenly getting attacked, maybe the Cougar spawns behind you and there's a sound, or maybe even the side turns around, and then you see it and it sprints towards you, and you have a few seconds to react. Just a very small window to react very, very quickly. In fact, the window could be so short that you have to have a weapon ready already, be on alert, because you know the Cougar's around, and then you can kill it before it attacks. Or at the very least, you can throw a flare at it, or shoot a flare gun, or a noisemaker, or just shoot a bullet to scare it off, or something. And that's what people want. People want to be able to deter the Cougar or kill it before it attacks you, because otherwise its attack is so devastating that if you let it attack you and you fail to kill it, it can end your entire run. It's just so devastating. So that's what people want. Now that doesn't mean that Hintlin is going to change it in that way. It just means that that's what the community wants. There's also other details about the Cougar that people think, oh, this should be like this or like that. But that's the gist of it. People really want the Cougar to be ideally in the real world so you can actually find it. And if not, the Cougar should give some warning before it attacks so you're ready to defend yourself. And it could be difficult to defend yourself. It could be hard. You have to be quick, whatever. But there should be an opportunity. That's what people want. And that doesn't mean developers are going to change it that way. The developers have a vision on how the Cougar works, and they have taken into account community feedback now, and they are going to change the Cougar. We don't know when it will come back. Could be next week, could be next year. We really don't know. But before we say anything else, I will point out and remind all of you that Hintlin does listen to the community. Hintlin has a vision of what the Long Dark is going to be, and they would like to have things certain ways, and they very rarely do playtesting like I was part of as well, but they do listen to community. So, and this has happened before. The most recent event prior to this was the release of Signal Void, which was part 2 of the DLC. When they added Signal Void, which was the first of the Tales, you had to go to the Forsaken Airfield and you got the radio and you had to fix these transmitter towers, you had to go get all these bunkers, and you got special loot, the rifle holster and all that stuff. And when it was released, they said, oh, it's not an interloper. And people said, why isn't it an interloper? Well, because there's a lot of loot and you got to find these caches and things, and that's not really what interloper is about. And then the vast majority of people said, I don't really care about the loot. I just want to have the tail in Interloper, even if the loot is minor. And then within 2 weeks, just 2 weeks after launch, they patched it and said, all right, we hear you. We added Interloper. Sorry, we added Signal Void to Interloper. There's nowhere near as much loot as lower difficulties, but there is an end tail reward, which for Signal Void was the technical balaclava. And then later in Buried Echoes, it's like the tool belt. I think that's on lower difficulties too. And then the third tail is, I think it's the technical gear. I'm not sure if that's an interloper, but that doesn't matter. The point is that they made a decision, the community protested, and then they changed the decision based on community feedback, and then everyone was happy. So they do listen to community. And they have received a lot of feedback on the Cougar, so they know what the community is saying about it. So don't think that they don't. Because I was a playtester, I communicated, at least in this period, quite often with Hinterland, and I gave some feedback to them about the Cougar based on what I had seen in my community. And then I basically asked them if they wanted more feedback, and they said no. We got it. so they have received a lot of feedback on the Cougar, and they are going to change it. They're not telling us how they're changing it, and they don't say when it's going to happen. It is summer now, so probably some holidays. If I had to guess, it will come out again maybe after the summer, maybe like September, October, maybe September. I think it will come back. And I think it's important to remember that when the Cougar does come back, we're not all going to like it. I think most likely what's going to happen is that the Cougar will be improved. They will change it in some way that is better than the last version. But there will still be some people who say, yeah, well, it's better, but I wish they had changed this, or it was actually like this. You know, there will always be someone who's unhappy. There's always ways it could be done better. But at the end of the day, as long as people are satisfied, it will be all right. When these things happen and they get ironed out, eventually we kind of forget about it. This isn't the first time that Hinton has been critiqued for something, and then we kind of move on from it. So the Signal Void thing was one thing, and then they patched it. It's like, okay, great. And now no one thinks twice about it. It's just a given that Signal Void and all the tails are an interloper. That's just a given. When the DLC was launched in December 5th, 2022, there was an error on launch. So they launched at local time for them. It was 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, I think it was, at 10 a.m. And for some reason, the game wouldn't work when you patched it. And everyone scrambled to figure out what it was. Turned out it was this one file that was wrong. And they fixed it within an hour and a half or something. And it was done, right? And people were uproar about it. There were a load of people who review bombed Long Dark, especially Tales on Steam, and created negative impressions. And it's like, oh god, they launched it, and after all this, how we can't even play the game. And people really bombed the game. But then, you know, they fixed it in an hour and a half. So everyone who, let's just round it up to 2 hours for sake of argument. Everyone who played the game 2 hours after launch or later wouldn't even know that this happened, right? They would have no clue that there was some sort of drama for about an hour and a half, 2 hours after launch. And no one talks about it now because who cares? The game's working, right? So when these things get fixed, we just move on. So the Cougar was a bit of a controversial thing, and it was likely the result, a combination of things between excessive hype from the community and an implementation of a mechanism that perhaps didn't work as well as intended. And they're going to change it, and I'm confident that when they do change it, it will be a good Cougar. It will be better than what it was before, but we won't all be happy about it, but that's okay. And if you're wondering what I thought about it, I actually really liked the Cougar mechanic. I'm basically in the camp of, I liked how it was, but I can see what people mean. I get why people are frustrated. Well, I really just liked it because it was different. I really liked that it wasn't just another super wolf roaming around, another animal going about somewhere in the world that you could find and kill. I liked there was something different. I also liked that it was extremely devastating, because that meant that killing one and surviving and then crafting the hat was really rare. Like, not a lot of people were going to do that on the main runs, especially because it was so high risk, especially on Interloper. In Interloper, if you missed the opportunity to kill the Cougar, you had to recover or you're just dead. You're just dead. On lower difficulties, you could survive 2 attacks. There were some details also, like there was also bugs with the Cougar when it was launched, but I'm not too worried about the bugs. These things get ironed out. Whenever new content is added, there's always bugs, and they will be fixed. You know, for example, as the streamer Bashrobe, he did some Cougar tests where he got attacked twice in a row, for example. I did a test, and the ballistic vest didn't do anything to prevent the damage from the Cougar, just the bleeds, and I don't know if that's intentional. But all these things, I don't really care about the bugs with the Cougar. That's going to be ironed out. But I thought the Cougar was quite neat. I thought it was really tense and ominous and a really deadly thing. And I felt it could easily be avoided by just leaving the area. But I do appreciate that it is frustrating if you get attacked and die and you had no way to defend yourself. So after hearing what the community thought about it, I kind of agree that, yeah, I can see it. I think maybe it should have some sort of mechanism to prevent its attack or kill it before it attacks you or something. I'm not sure exactly what, but I can see why people are complaining about it. There was also an issue with the bow. On Interlope, you only really have the bow as a weapon against the Cougar, really, and it took a long time to draw the bow. It was very hard to kill the Cougar with the bow. I only did it myself once. So yeah, that's the Cougar Controversy. It's just, it was a very hyped edition, and a substantial amount of people were unhappy about it, and as a result, they removed it. They're going to bring it back, they're going to change it, and we'll have to see what that is about. And this is by far the biggest topic in this little podcast of mine, because people just had so many opinions about it. And it'll be very interesting to see what they do next. I'm very excited to see what the future Cougar is going to look like. If you haven't actually played against the Cougar, you missed the opportunity. It is possible to do it, just don't update your game. And then you still have the Cougar in there, or you can copy it. You can copy the whole game folder, and then if it updates, you can just copy it back and that sort of thing. There might be a time capture code also, not that I'm aware of, though. I don't think there is one, but maybe there is one, and it allows you to go back. Now, a final thing about the Cougar, I don't think I need to really talk about this particularly much, but in case you didn't know, I was one of the 4 playtesters for Misery, which we'll talk about in a second, that was added with this expansion. And that included that I got early access to the Cougar, which is why I was able to release a video about how the Cougar worked about 15 minutes after launch. But we weren't, just to be clear, the 4 of us weren't play testers for the Cougar. I've seen some people say that, oh, it's strange that these 4 play testers signed off on the Cougar, but that's not really what happened. We got access to the content patch, the launch build for the release prior to it being released, so that we could create content in advance. And I recorded the Cougar, and I also recorded my blind playthrough of Sundered Pass. I didn't do any Misery or anything else. And basically what they told us was that if we had a chance to encounter the Cougar, and they told us how to do it, and they would appreciate the feedback. That's basically what happened there, but we weren't testers for it specifically. And I did give some feedback to Hintlin, but you got to keep in mind that this is days, we're talking days before release. And even if I had said to Hinterland, which I didn't, but if I had said to Hinterland, you cannot release this Cougar in its current state, people will absolutely hate it. You can't do it. You know, it's too late to change change it at that point. So it was mostly our impression of it, and I'm not going to get into what I said to Hinterland about the Cougar, because I think that's a confidential thing between me and Hinterland. But I did give them a little report on my feedback about the Cougar, and I did have some criticisms that they did take to heart, but they were going to work on it after the launch. So I gave feedback to the Cougar, on the Cougar to Hinterland, but I wasn't a playtester per se. It was more like I had access to it just before launch. My real involvement was with Misery, which we'll talk about now in a second. So that's the Cougar for you. Very split the community a lot. Definitely something original. I really liked the Cougar, but I do see why people were upset about it, and I think the removal of it was probably the right decision by Hinterland, and they're going to create something that's hopefully much better. So that was the Cougar. There's so much to say about it, and yeah, let's move on to another topic. Let's move on to Misery, which is the new mode. Now, it's interesting to point out that the Cougar actually overshadows the rest of the content. Because, well, the rest of it was added to the Long Dark. Misery, the Tales, the new region, and all that stuff. That has been mostly positively received. Sure, there's always some complaints, or I wish this was better, or there's bugs and this and that. But generally speaking, people seem to really enjoy the new content that has been added. And even if they're not playing it, they like watching other people play it. So I would say that this new content that came with The Last Horizon is probably the most ambitious content Hinterland has added for a long time, because there's such big things being added. It's a new region, a new animal, a new mode, a new death mechanic. Really big game-changing things. Unlike the other updates, which are more like, oh, we're adding a region and Tales. Oh, we fixed fishing, and oh, we're adding scurvy to the game, you know. They're not, this is probably the grandest update they've had in a long time. And with such massive changes comes ambition and also controversy, because people are very split opinion. But my impression, reading the comments in my community and online and the streamers, like from what I can see, generally speaking, people seem to really like the rest of the content. Sundered Pass especially, people really like Sundered Pass. People seem to really like Misery. Not everyone, but a lot of people really like Misery. The cheat death mechanic, before it was added, seemed to be really controversial. It's by far the most controversial thing people talked about. But after it was released, I haven't seen that much discussion about it, really. So people are either indifferent or positive. So on the whole, if you take the Cougar out of the equation, I would say this content patch was actually a major success. They added a lot of stuff, really good stuff, and very like interesting things for sure. So I would say overall this was a pretty good and successful patch. It's just that the Cougar stole the limelight by far because of how it worked, and therefore people don't talk that much about the rest of it. So yeah, that's important to note, I think. People get focused on the Cougar, and I understand why. Now, with Misery, so they added some other things. So the Long Dark now has a new mode. The first mode since they added Interloper, which is like 10 years ago or something. Actually, it's the 10-year anniversary for Long Dark this year. They added a new mode, which is called Misery. So let's talk about Misery, and that is the new mode. And I know a lot about Misery because I was one of the playtesters. So myself, Tomasina, Hadrian and Athenan were playtesters for Misery, and we had access to Misery quite a long time in advance. I will explain the playtesting a little bit, but I'm not going to get into details, and I'm not going to share my reports and that sort of thing, because even though we didn't like sign anything, I just think it's a given that my interaction with Hinterland is a confidential thing, but I can talk about it in general, if that makes sense. So first let's talk about what Misery is. Misery is an attempt to make a difficulty in the game that's harder than Interloper and more on par with Nogoa. So if you're not familiar with what Nogoa is, that's very important in this context. In the Long Dark, Interloper is the hardest difficulty in the game. If you choose to play As the Dead Sleep, the challenge, as a survival mode, that's harder, because in As the Dead Sleep, you cannot regenerate health, and there's no prey animals either. So it's As the Dead Sleep is kind of like Super Interloper, but most people can't be bothered to play As the Dead Sleep. So instead, people have made these custom challenges to make the game harder, and there are many of these. Deadman was the original one, and Nogoa is a harder version of Deadman. Nogoa is called No One Gets Out Alive. It was created by streamer Perfect Trip, and then I think it was modified by Once and Only. We both are masters of this. And what Nogoa does is it's a custom difficulty where everything is set to the worst possible conditions. You have less loot, worse weather, more wolves, and no health regeneration. All the meat is drained faster. You spawn in a blizzard, and so on. It's really, really brutal stuff. I have a series about it on my channel if you want to see how I did it when I played Nogoa. And it's basically a super version of As the Dead Sleep. And this is a mode that very few people have mastered. People have survived 500 days or longer on this mode, but most people don't master this mode. And the ones who are really good at this, they even make it harder. They say, oh, let's do Outer Nogoa. You can only be outdoors and you have no health regeneration, right? There are always ways to make the game harder. And some people really enjoy that. They enjoy making the game as hard as possible because that's what's fun for them. Those of you who have seen my Nogoa series, when I played it, you know my opinion on it, which is that I think Nogoa is very creative and I appreciate that it exists and I highly respect people who master it. But personally, I don't like it that much because it becomes a campfire simulator. It's basically like you have to constantly warm up teas and create fires with coal and that sort of thing. And I felt that the no health regeneration is such a penalty to movement and exploration that I didn't really enjoy it that much, even if I could handle the difficulty. And up until now, Nogoa was probably, or a variant of Nogoa, was probably the hardest difficulty you could do in the Long Dark if you did it custom mode. But then came Misery, and the attempt with Misery is to make something harder than Nogoa that is aimed at killing people. And I don't remember exactly what was said in the dev diary when they announced Misery, but I can say that at least in my conversation with Hintland, the idea was that this mode couldn't be conquered. Everyone would die in this mode. When they made it, the idea was that the players, they're not going to survive. We're talking about sub 100 days. Everyone dies at some point, and it's just a question of how far you can stretch it, right? So some people have survived like 20,000 days on Interloper by now. Most people only get to day 500 or less, and then they just stop. It's not that they can't go further, it's just that they don't bother. But there are people who, I managed 1,000 days on Interloper, and there are people who had thousands of days on Interloper. I think even Dark is the longest now. I think it's 20,000 days on Interloper. I'm not sure exactly. But anyway, they wanted to make a mode that was much, much harder. And the way the Misery works, if you're not familiar with it yet, is that you spawn in a fixed location. You always spawn in Pleasant Valley. And day one of Misery is more or less the same as Interloper. It's a similar weather condition. There are similar amounts of plants. The loot is similar to Interloper as well. A bit more generous than Nogoa, but a bit less than Interloper. And then after just one day, an affliction kicks in. And there are 6 permanent afflictions in the game, and they all debilitate the player in some way. We don't need to go into exactly what those 6 afflictions are, but they all make it harder for the player. They do things like reduce your carry capacity and sprint, take increased damage, you get colder, and you have a smaller stomach, and you get increased food poisoning and all this stuff. And the final affliction that you get, the first and last affliction is always the same. The last affliction kicks in on day 46. If you get all the way to day 46, Then you get the broken body affliction, which basically stops health regeneration entirely. There are some glitches that people can use and some bugs or exploits people can use to still heal, but assuming those be fixed, once you get to day 46, your health is finite. No health regeneration whatsoever. And you take double damage. Isn't that fun? And that's harder than Nogoa, because in Nogoa, you also have no health regeneration, but you can still heal with stims and with pies. So you can actually recover a little bit of health in Nogoa. Nogoa is only harder than Misery in the beginning, because in the beginning of Misery, it's kind of like a harder version of Interloper, but then as it progresses, as you get more and more afflictions, Misery gets harder and harder and harder, and eventually becomes a super Nogoa. So that's the idea. The idea is that it's a really super Interloper difficulty that gives these permanent afflictions to the player that will slow you down and eventually kill you. And Hintlin has said that most people won't master this mode, and they're right, because it is very, very difficult. Those people who think Interloper is very easy and they just casually breeze through custom difficulties like Nogoa, those people will do fine in Misery. They will. But the average player will not survive very long in Misery. And my impression from reading the comments and looking at streamers who don't usually play high difficulties is that most people die before day 20. Because then it starts getting too hard. Now, I was a playtester for Misery, and we had access quite a far in advance, and that was our main role as playtesters. We only had access to the whole content of the patch a few days or so, I don't remember exactly how long, before launch, but our main role was with Misery, and we were given a version of the game that had Misery included, and then that's it. No Cougar or anything like that at that point. And again, I'm not going to say exactly. I wrote a lengthy report. I was very thorough in my predictions and feedback on Misery, and I wrote a lengthy report to Hintlin about it. I can give some information, but I'm not going to share what my report was or how I communicate with Hintlin and all that stuff, or what they said, because I think I consider that confidential. But I will say what my impression of it was, which is the same as it is now post-launch. When I tested it, I said that basically that this is a really great mode, but there will be people who can defeat this. When I playtested, I felt that, wow, this is really cool. This is much harder than Interloper. It's very difficult. There's a lot of things to that makes this harder. But I just felt that, like, if you do it right, you can survive forever in Misery. It's very difficult because you have no health regeneration. You take double damage. There's also an affliction that removes cooking level 5, and that's a major thing. So in the normal game, and Interloper and below, once you get cooking level 5, it becomes a breeze, because you can just have food stacked. You can kill a bear and leave 40 kilos of bear meat outside your base. Then you go do something else. You come back, all the food is ruined, and then you think, who cares? You got cooking level 5. Cooking level 5 makes you immune to food poisoning. And then you just eat the food anyway, even though it's 0%. And that's a very common strategy. I mean, I do it. On Misery, that doesn't work. On Misery, there's an affliction called Sour Stomach that removes this. It basically says that you have increased risk of food poisoning in any item that would normally give food poisoning, irrespective of what your cooking level is. So that means that the only way to avoid, and in Misery, if you're going to get into late game, the only way to avoid food poisoning is to eat food that doesn't have food poisoning risk, which is like fresh food, or fresh meat, for example. If you leave it and the condition goes down, you have a risk of getting food poisoning, and even if you treat it very quickly, you will lose a little bit of health, and the self-love is permanent, and then you die. So that means that in the late game of Misery, you have to upkeep your food intake all the time, and you also have to do fishing because of vitamin C. So there's a lot to upkeep. Misery becomes much stricter in its upkeep and maintaining warmth and that sort of thing. But it is in theory possible to survive forever. And I told the developers this. I basically said that most people are not going to survive in Misery, but some people will manage to do it. And I also felt that I actually like the idea that misery mode can be conquered, even if it's very, very difficult. I prefer that it's very difficult to survive a long time on misery, rather than that the player just dies at some point. And I had a I had a suggestion. I had a list of suggestions to Hintland that I said, if you really want to kill the player, here's a bunch of things you can do that will probably kill the player, but you have to ask yourself if that's what you really want. And I'm not going to say what all of those suggestions were, because that would have made a brutal mode. But suffice it to say, when I did playtest, I really enjoyed it, and I wrote a lengthy report in and said, this is what I think about it. This is what I think is going to happen when you release it. This is what these people are going to do about it. And I think most people will die, but some will not. And then, they took my feedback into account, and they changed some things, and then they released it. And that's it. That's pretty much all I'll say about it. All the details and everything else about how it worked, in my interaction, what I said, and what they said. I'm not going to talk about that unless I get some sort of green light from them. I'm just going to treat that as if it was confidential, because I was going to assume that that's what they want. But I will say there was a great experience to playtest. It was a real honor to playtest. I was asked, as one of 4 people asked, and it was really nice. We were in very close contact with Katie, especially, but also Raf, and they were great, wonderful people, and we felt like we really mattered. We gave feedback and it mattered. Our playtesting made a difference. It did. And I really enjoyed it. The only difficult part was I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't tell anyone at all about it, other than the other playtesters, obviously. But it was great to be part of that team and playtest it together and give feedback and that sort of thing. And I really appreciate that Hintland did that, not just for me but for the others. It was a good choice of streamers, because we all play very differently. The game, like the way I play the game, is very different from how Tomasina plays it, for example. So that was a great experience to be part of that. So I really appreciate that from Hintland. And I like Misery. I think Misery is a great addition to the game. I don't think it's going to supplant Interloper. I think people who prefer high difficulties will stick to Interloper, at least for a while. It's possible that, give it a year or something, people are going to crack Misery mode, and then it'll be like the next Interloper. So yeah, just do this or that and you got it figured out, sort of thing. But I don't think so, because it's too punishing. And me personally, I really like Misery, but at the end of the day, the end game of Misery is a harder version of Nagoa, and there's only so much joy that I find in having health loss permanently off. Health regeneration off permanently. So I'm going to try my best to survive on Misery as long as I can, but I probably won't grind it. I'll probably stick to Interloper, but we'll see though. I do really like that they added afflictions. I thought that was very creative, and it's a good mode that is Misery. There are people who have voiced things they don't like about it. They don't like the randomness of the afflictions. They felt like the afflictions should be triggered by certain things, or that they could be modified by certain things, like certain diets, for example. Some people don't like the static spawn in Pleasant Valley, and I really like that because it standardizes things and it makes it more even. So if people say, oh, I survived 20 days, and the other person says, I survived 30. So how do you survive 30? Oh, because I spawned in Hatchet Valley. Oh, okay. You know what I mean? So I like that it's standardized, but I mean, it's not a big deal though. But yeah, Misery is great. I really like Misery. It's a really good addition to the game. It's nice to have something harder than Interloper, but at the same time it doesn't supplant Interloper. It's nice to give a real challenge, because very, very rarely does the developers create content that's catered to Interloper players. The vast majority of content is aimed at the general Long Dark player, who is typically a Voyager Stalker player. There's a significant amount of people who play Pilgrim all the time as well. And most of the content they add is with these people in mind. So that's when they add a lot of gear that's not even on the interloper and this sort of thing. Very rarely do they add stuff specifically with interloper players in mind. The addition of Tails was an exception because of community feedback. But it's very rare that that's happened. And this is one of those occasions where they felt they made something for the veteran interloper players to give them a challenge. And that was great. I really liked that. So yeah, Misery is great. I think Misery is a fantastic mode. I look forward to seeing how people deal with it and how long I can survive myself. And there's a load of people who definitely can conquer this mode. I highly recommend you go on Twitch, because on Twitch, say what you want about Twitch, but the Long Dark community on Twitch is fantastic. There's a couple key players right now, like Once and Only, that's a bit AWOL at the moment for good reason. But there's loads of really great people on Twitch. You know, I can't name them all, but you got Tomasina and Athenian, you have Randalfo, you have Corin Thistle, DH Dunn, you have Acidic Virus and Tina Bug and Paraloopable and a whole bunch of people. There are so many people, and they are all friendly, and they all shout each other out, and they all give advice, and it's a great place to be, the Long Dark Twitch community. And I can think of at least 10 people that I know are gonna crack Misery mode and just survive at least 100 days, at least. So keep an eye out. It's too early now, but in time there will be be clearer who can survive the longest. I have no aim of being the one who survived the longest. I'm just going to see how long I can survive. How long I survived on playtesting is irrelevant, because that doesn't matter. That was a beta version of it with feedback in mind and this and so on. So how long I survived it doesn't matter. How long I survived after launch is what matters. Yeah, that's Misery. Great addition, I think. And then we have another thing that caused a lot of controversy when it was announced. Not so much controversy when it was implemented, and that's Cheat Death. So Cheat Death is, I was really surprised to hear they were adding this to the game. Cheat Death is a way to remove permadeath in the game. Misery mode doesn't have it. And the way it works is that basically you get 3 lives, or 3 extra lives rather. So if you die, you don't have to end the game. Permadeath is not there anymore. And when this was announced, people were a bit like, huh? Why are you adding that in? The whole point of permadeath is that you're married to your run. You feel a sense of grief when it ends, right? But the reason they add this is because it happens quite often that people die for quote-unquote stupid reasons. Sometimes it's a technical thing. Oops, I fell through the world and I lost my 400-day run. Or, the game froze and the save file is gone. Or I thought I paused the game, but I didn't, and I went to the shop, and then I stayed at night, a weekend in Vegas, came back, and I was dead. These things happen, and sometimes you left auto walk on and you walked over the cliff, right? So they felt that sometimes people lose really long runs for irritating reasons that are sometimes beyond the player's control, and they wanted to implement something to get people back if that happens. Now people are really bothered about that. They back up their saves anyway, and then if they die they just copy that save back in. But that's not the point. That doesn't really matter. So the way Cheat Death works is the way they've done it is actually really good, because you could click end. When you die, you could just click end game, and then that's the same as permadeath. Your run is over. And the developers said in the launch trailer that depending on community feedback, they might have it so that when you start your run, you have to choose if you want cheat death or not. So you make the choice at the beginning of the run and not when you die, because then you still have that permadeath feeling. If you die, you're dead, right? Rather than making the choice when you actually die. So we'll see that might be implemented. However, as it currently stands, the way it works is if you die, you then lose a bunch of stuff. So you can then respawn, But this respawn is brutal. You can tell that this mechanism is aimed at people who have long runs with load of supplies everywhere. Because if you choose to use cheat death, it's really hard to actually continue the game. It's not as easy as just an extra life. Bugs aside, there are always glitches with these things when they're launched. I mean, I respawned in midair and died, for example, but I'm going to assume these things get ironed out. But the way it works is when you die, first you lose progress. If you had achievement progress on that run, that's annulled, or like it stops rather. And you lose some of your gear. So your backpack is then placed somewhere in the world, and you can go find it, and it's on the map where it is. But you'll lose a bunch of your items. Several times with me and others when I've tested it, you lose your weapon very often, for example. Your clothes get damaged, so you lose a bunch of stuff. But more than that, you get this debuff. So you can choose to have a short-term debuff or a permanent one that's milder. And the first time you die, I believe it's 50% health loss. So if you choose the short-term penalty, you have to play with 50% health for 30 days. That's a really long time. So for 30 days, you're walking around with half health. That's really brutal. Alternatively, you can choose a permanent health loss, which I think is 30% the first time you die. So you just immediately lose 30% of your health. You're never going to get it back. You're permanently walking around with 70% health. You could do that instead. And in addition, when you do respawn for about 2 to 3 days of the game, you also have this noir filter on, so it's like everything looks black and white. And then if you choose the short-term penalty, if you do survive the 30 days, it all goes away, and it's as if you never died, health-wise anyway. But you may have lost some of your gear. Alternatively, you can have the permanent one, and each time you die, these penalties get more severe. And in addition to that, you can choose your spawn. You can choose to have a close spawn, which can be fairly close to where you died, or at least in the same region you died, or a spawn far away, which is really far away and in a safe area, usually indoors. And this is an interesting thing because it's actually really hard to survive cheat death. If it's early game especially, if you choose a short-term penalty and a close respawn, the game will typically spawn you outside with maybe 20% health with the filter on, and you have almost no gear. Usually it spawns you with like 1 stick and 3 matches. And you have to survive now in the cold, and it's freezing cold, and you can't see much of it because of the filter, and you have almost no health. So it's very often people die in their first attempt at cheat death because it's so brutal. And if you choose the far away spawn, you're now in a completely different area, and you have to kind of start from scratch, and you still have these penalties. It's really hard. However, what you can do, if you are in the late game, the interesting thing about cheat death mechanic is that it really emphasizes the importance of regional bases. So I have done this for years, and in all of my videos, my tours, I always say that you should have this. In every region, you should have at least one regional base. So if your main base is in Mystery Lake, where you have all your good stuff, then you should have a base in Pleasant Valley and Coastal Highway. One area, like the farm or the garage, doesn't matter. Anywhere you want, where you have some supplies. You got some matches, you got wood, you got food, water, just, some basic resources. And it's important to set it up in pretty much every region. So then if you're in the late game, let's say you're on day 200 or whatever, and you die, and then you choose the short-term penalty of 50% health loss or whatever, and you spawn far away, the game will then spawn you in a different region. But because you have a regional base set up, you can then go to that base and you can get your essential supplies and you can start surviving, even if you don't have a weapon necessarily. But because you might lose your weapon, it's actually important to have reserve weapons in these regional bases, or at least the means to create them. So if you want to survive cheat death, so it's interesting. So cheat death then removes permadeath, but cheat death itself is so brutal that you have to have the means to survive it. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible without the regional bases. I mean, some people, I guarantee you, some people are deliberately going to die 3 times when they spawn, and then just go from there and do this a challenge. But cheat death is pretty brutal. You definitely need to try, and you hope to spawn somewhere where you have regional base and then just rebuild and outlast the penalty, unless you go for the permanent one. Me personally, I feel like the permanent penalty is, I'm probably almost never going to choose it, because I would much rather choose the short-term penalty and try and survive it, and if I don't, I just die. That's how I see it. I'd rather try to remove the short-term penalty than take a permanent hit, but that's just me. And keep in mind that when you choose a faraway spawn, they mean like really far away. When I was in Pleasant Valley and I died in one of my testing runs and I clicked far away, I spawned in Desolation Point. I've seen some people die in Sundered Pass, and they respawned in Broken Railroad, that sort of thing. You spawn pretty far away. I get the impression you tend to spawn roughly 2 regions away when you choose far away, but I've seen longer, so there isn't a specific system to it. So yeah, cheat death is interesting in the sense that it removes permadeath, but at such a high cost that it's almost a delayed permadeath in a way. But if you can manage to scrape through and survive, then you can continue to run. But you can only do it 3 times though. So if you haven't noticed that, you have these campfires on your screen now. That's your lives basically. So yeah, that's cheat death for you. It was it's an interesting addition to the game. Not as controversial as I first thought when it was announced. Pretty controversial. People have like opinions about it, but after launch, people haven't really talked about it that much. It's like, yeah, people are a bit split about it, but it doesn't seem to be a major thing really. I like it. I thought I wouldn't like it, if I'm honest. I didn't think I would like it because for me, the whole thing with permadeath was the heart of the game, that you are invested in your character, and if it dies, that's terrible, and you have a sense of grief, and you have a much more investment in a run, and there's permadeath. And I didn't actually like the idea of cheat death because of that. Well, I understand why they did it, so people have a comeback way when they die in an annoying way. But the way they implement, actually, I don't mind it because it's so brutal. Like you take, even if you choose, even if you have set up a regional base, right, and you're prepared for cheat death, and you die, and you spawn in one of your regional bases far away, where you have left lots of stuff, so you're still gonna be with low health and 50% health loss for 30 days, and the filter, which eventually goes away. And you now have to survive for 30 days with a massive penalty, and you have to probably make new weapons, and if not, you have to recraft some stuff, you have to go out and forage, you might have to make your way back to the backpack to see what you got, and all sorts of things, and that's really hard. You have a massive handicap for a short amount of time, and that's really going to test your survival skills. And the way I feel about that is that if you choose cheat death, and particularly the short-term option, and you get that penalty, if you survive the penalty of cheat death, then you kind of deserve to keep going, right? And if you want to talk about it from a realistic point of view, you can just say that, oh, the wolf thought you were dead, and it left, and then you crawled to safety, and you passed out, and you woke up, and it's like, oh, I'm alive, you know, Revenant style, basically. So yeah, that's cheat death for you. Then we have the new region, and the new region, I really like it. I think it's a very good region, actually. I really like the new region Sundered Pass. It's fantastic. I not playtested, but I recorded it prior to launch, and it was a bit annoying actually because I did it blind. I always try new regions blind, and I played it, I think it was on Thursday before the patch came out on a Monday, and I recorded my blind playthrough on Thursday, and I I didn't spoiler alert if you haven't. You should watch the video if you want. But spoiler alert: on my first attempt, I died. I actually couldn't manage to survive blind. It was too difficult. The game was really cold, really brutal. And then I took a break because I can only record so much per day because I have a little boy and, you know, I have limited time. And then the next day, on Friday, I continued and did another attempt. But in between Thursday and Friday, they had patched it and they had changed some things in the region. And one of them is a warmth bonus. When Ash Canyon was released as a region, the caves didn't have a warmth bonus, so they were really cold. And then a little while later, they patched it, so the caves did have warmth bonuses like the rest of the caves in the game. Which I actually kind of liked that they didn't have it. I thought it was intentional, but I guess it wasn't. And in Sundered Pass, it was the same. The cabins that you find didn't have a very strong warmth bonus, and it was too cold to stay there. And then they patched it, they got warmer. So then I thought, well, if that had been the case on my first attempt, I probably would have survived. Oh well, that is what it is. But the region itself is very good. It probably is the hardest region in the game because there are so many Timberwolves in it in the upper levels. The lower levels, not so much, but the upper levels have loads. There's at least, well, depends. You can get unlucky or lucky, but there's at least 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, at least 4 packs of Timberwolves at any given time in just like less than half of the map. I think there's 5 packs actually. And that's the main criticism people have. So the Sundered Pass, as far as I can tell from the feedback, people like it. People like Sundered Pass as a region. People are happy with Sundered Pass. What people don't like about it is Timberwolves. And I won't like that as Timberwolves in it because that means that each of the 3 regions stand out. In Forsaken Airfield, you have this massive expanse. In Zone of Contamination, you have the gas, but also the poisoned wolves, which you only find in Zone of Contamination. And then in Sundered Pass, you have Timberwolves, and it's the only region in the Far Territory that has Timberwolves. And I really liked it. I found that the Timberwolves made it very challenging because there's so many of them. But it's a great design. It's very elevated, and it gets colder the higher you go. There's loads of pathways and caves and this and that. And the tails, I haven't done the tails, but the people who have done it said it's pretty good. And I really, really like it. It's a very cool region. It's very remote. And I actually really like that the Far Territory is really far away. Some people don't like that. Some people think there should be some sort of fast travel or that it wasn't so far. I really like that it's far away because then it gives you a sense of a long journey to go to. And yeah, Sundered Pass is great. I really love the cave systems. I love the scenery, including the cave that you need to get through to get there. I love that it's so high up. I love the plateau with all the Timberwolves and destroyed the cabins. The weather station is great, although I think the weather station actually is too easy to get to. Once you know how to get to the weather station, it's really easy to get there. So I think that that was a little bit too easy, but only if you know how to get there, obviously. It's not like the summit, for example. And if you know how to get to the summit, it's a pretty long trek to get to the summit. But the weather station, once you know how to get there, it's not that hard. But other than that, I think it's a really good region. I really like it. Some people don't like the glimmer fog. I don't mind the glimmer fog. It's just another type of fog with extra debuffs, you know. That's it. Yeah, so there's not that much to say about Sundered Pass, really. Other than it's a good region. I like the design of it, and as I have said many times before, I really appreciate that all 3 regions in the Far Territory are very different from each other. You have like the open expanse, you have the mine, and you have the mountain. Very, very different from each other, and I really like that. So it's a great region, really. It might become my favorite region, but it depends. I have to stay there a bit longer. But I think it's a great design. It almost certainly is the hardest region, especially to spawn in. But it's brutal because it's so cold, and there's so many Timberwolves, and there's a lot of space between places you can hide and take shelter. So it's a tough one, but I like it. A really good region. So yeah, so that's what's added so far, basically. And as I said, like overall, I think it was pretty well received. I haven't seen around that many complaints about this particular patch, except for the Cougar. The Cougar stole the attention in the Limelight, so people really focused on it, and a lot of complaints about the Cougar. But the other stuff, Misery and Cheat Death and the new region, yeah, always some things people don't like, obviously, and there's things I don't like either. But overall, people seem to be pretty happy about it. Or at least not unhappy about it. So I would say overall it's a success. I think it's a great patch. It was very ambitious, and that is, you know, there was a lot of big things added to it. So yeah, I think the game at the moment is great. If you haven't got the DLC, I highly recommend you get it, because it does change things. It definitely makes the game easier, just because the cooking you can do, just that alone makes the game easier than Ptarmigans. So it's totally worth it for the money, because if you don't have the DLC, then it's worth getting it, because, well, you get 3 new regions, you get tails, you get new items, and even new animals, and there's a lot to be added with the DLC, and it really changes the game in the sense that you don't have to have the DLC, but it makes the game easier and more inclusive, really. I think they've done an amazing job with the DLC in total. In all the new content, I mean, there's a load of new content they've added ever since 2022, and I don't really care that it takes them longer than they initially planned. There's so much stuff added, and I still think this is the best game ever made. Obviously, there are things that could be improved. There's always something that could be improved. There's also, like, if I had to say what I would like to have changed in the game, they are all minor quality of life things. I actually am thinking of making a video about that one day, so I won't talk about them all here. But for example, just to name one, you know, I really think that Timberwolves, for example, if you kill them, they should give a different pelt than wolves, because then there is more an incentive to kill them, and then you can craft something different with that pelt as a kind of reward, for example, that sort of thing, and some other stuff. But this still is an amazing game, and like I said before the DLC was added, if there was no updates from that point on, I still think it would be the best game ever made. And I have actually thought about making a video called Why the Long Dark is the best game ever made. It's just I never get around to it, but what I could do, because I don't know, it takes so long to write scripts and things, but I might, if you like this video, which is literally me winging it for over an hour, then I might make a similar video like this about what I think about The Long Dark as a whole, and why I think it's an amazing game. And the answer to why it's such an amazing game is not just the game itself, it's also the community around the game, as well as the developers themselves. There's a lot of facets to it. It's not just the game itself that makes it so good. And I love it. I love The Long Dark. I never get bored of it. Obviously, there are periods where I'm like, let's play something else. But I really love it. I feel like I really click with it. It's this, you can get lost in The Long Dark. DLC or no DLC, Cougar or no Cougar, Pilgrim or Misery mode, whatever. You can play this game however you want to play it. And you can immerse yourself in it in a way that no other game can, and you can create a home in The Long Dark that really speaks to you from the heart, and that makes it such a wonderful game. And if you don't like the content, you can use mods, and some people use mods and you get all sorts of other stuff in the game, and it's a whole new game from that. Some people use the multiplayer mod even. I think that Long Dark is an isolation game, so I don't really see the point of adding multiplayer. Although I have mellowed a bit. I made a video about multiplayer about 2 years ago where I said that I don't see the point of multiplayer. Like, what's the point of that in Long Dark? Is kind of, you know, but if you want to do it, here's how you do it. But since then I mellowed a bit, like, well, let people play however they want. If they want to play Long Dark multiplayer with a mod, why not? Let them do that. Who cares? Just as long as you have fun with the game, that's what matters. As long as you have fun, then that's what matters in this game. If you're not having fun, then that's a shame, but hopefully you can play the game however you want. You can play Interlope, you can play Misery, you can ignore Cheat Death or not, you can like or dislike the Cougar. As long as you're having fun playing, it's what matters. And I really enjoy The Long Dark. My Road to 500 Days series is taking forever to do just because there's so much content I make in between. But it's also because I take my time with Road to 500 Days. Every episode is a few days in the game, and it's just so nice to be immersed in it. Like, some people say that they don't understand people can survive for so long because they get bored after so many days. But I feel like you never run out of things to do in the Long Dark because there's so much to do. You have so many places to explore, so many things to craft, so many things to find. The tales add a whole new element as well that you need to do. And then even if you do all this stuff, you know, you might have to kill a bear or a moose to get supplies for your base. And then while you've done that, you might as well go to the other base and do the same thing then. Just the maintenance alone in the late game keeps you busy forever. And then you need to fish for scurvy. Scurvy, I didn't really like what that was added to the game, but I'm warming up to it because it creates more of a challenge late game. It's a mechanic basically to make it a little bit harder to survive for a long time, so people don't just hibernate and kill bears all the time. So I get why they added that. But yeah, Long Dark is a great game, and despite the Cougar being what it was, I still think the latest content, The Last Horizon, was a success, and I think Hennes did a good job with cheat death. I thought cheat death was weird initially. I didn't understand why they added that. Well, I understand why they added it, but I didn't think it was necessary. But the way it works, I think it's actually good, because it's so brutal that you kind of deserve it. If you manage to survive through cheat death, you kind of deserve to keep going. So I actually like it. Misery mode, I think, is great. We have to see after the community has played it some more how it ends up, if it ends up being the new Interloper or not. I don't think it will. I like that it's really difficult, but I like that there's a window opportunity where you can master it. And I will say, I'm not going to, like I said, I'm not going to share. I wrote a pretty lengthy feedback about Misery to Hinterland and told them what I thought about it, how I think the community will react to it, and how they can change it. And you probably have me to thank for some of the changes, because I did say to them that it's a little bit too easy in the sense that I'm pretty sure people can master it. And I know they changed it following my feedback, but I like that they kept Misery as a mode that they initially wanted to kill the player, but then, as Raph said in the launch trailer, he basically said that some people will master this mode, and that's exactly right. Some people, the hardcore players, the veterans, the people who really like to challenge themselves, they will conquer Misery, and they will be able to survive for hundreds of days. I am sure there will be someone who survives 1,000 days on Misery, or I think. But the vast majority won't do it. So I really liked the Misery was added. It was also a real privilege to be a playtester for it. It was nice to be part of Hinterland's testing team and everything like that. It was a really great experience, and they picked a good team. I especially liked, I'll just say, I especially liked that they picked Tomasina, not so much me, because Tomasina is a fantastic player. If you're listening to this and you made it all the way this far, your keyword is Tomasina. You should go check her out on Twitch, because one thing that's always annoyed me about Tomasina is that she isn't a Twitch partner. I'm just going to take this opportunity to say it, because in this is a whole nother thing and belongs in the Long Dark, why it's a good game video, but on Twitch there's really 3 streamers that are regular Long Dark content creators that are Twitch partners, and that's Kimiota, Athenan, and Ones and Only, and they are Twitch partners. And if you're a Twitch partner, you get more revenue and that sort of thing from Twitch. And Tomasina streams full-time. It's her full-time job to stream. And she primarily streams the Long Dark. Not only, but primarily. And she is just under the criteria to become a Twitch partner. And that they chose her, and that they gave her a boost. And I don't know if it's enough, but I really hope she becomes a partner. And in any case, if you haven't already, go check her out. She's fantastic. And a really good player. Okay, so yeah, I think that's enough about this. This was, I've never done a video like this before. If you did listen all the way to the end, all I can say is, well, thank you for listening. And there's 2 things really. One is, let me know in the comments what you think about all this. Like, what did you think about the expansion? What did you think about the DLC? You don't necessarily say what you think about the Cougar, but you can. But there's been a lot of feedback about that. But what is your overall impression of the Last Horizon content patch? What did you think about it? That's one thing I would like to know. But another thing is, if you listen all this way, what did you think about this kind of video? So normally when I make videos like this, where I give a feedback about the content added and the state of the game and that sort of thing, it's usually in the form of a campfire chat. And I have notes in advance what I want to talk about, not a script, but notes. And it tends to be about 20 to 30 minutes long. And I talk about the main points. And I'm going to keep doing that whenever they have content. But this was more of a reflection of the content. And it's I'm completely winging it here. I don't have any notes or anything. It's just talking at the top of my head, waffling on, repeating myself at times. And I'm just sharing my thoughts about what's happening and also what I think and what my impression is and what my analysis is. And I'm sure some of you probably listened to this rather than watching it, which is fine because there wasn't really much to put on. But that's it, really. What did you think about this sort of thing? If you liked it, do you want me to do this sort of thing again on other topics in the Long Dark with other content? Or did you think it was a bit boring and just going on and I should do something else? Let me know what you think. It was the first time I ever made a video like this. Really, it's more of a podcast, really. But it was fun to do. It is better usually to have notes and edit and that sort of thing because you get more concise things you need to say and you know exactly the arguments you're going to make. But I just thought I'd sit down really and just talk about what has happened in the Long Dark lately and what I felt about it and my review of it, so to speak. And that's pretty much what this video is, and that's all it is. And I hope you're able to follow it, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you use this video to fall asleep, I hope you slept well. I'm not going to throw in like a revolver sound to wake you up or anything like that. But yeah, so that's the Long Dark. That's the state of the Long Dark right now. The Cougar was a bit of a setback. We'll have to see what happens to it. We don't know yet, but it's going to be exciting to see. And then Wintermute Part 5 is coming up. And of course we got DLC Part 6 eventually with the trader, all that stuff. So there's a lot of exciting things happening. And I think, as I said, aside from maybe a little setback with the Cougar, the last patch was great. Really cool stuff added. Region, cheat death, misery. Really cool stuff. And the Cougar will be fixed. It will come back. It will be alright. And in a year or two's time, we'll forget all about this. I mean, this whole thing. Who cares? It will be just this regular thing in the game. And again, Kindlin does a great job. And as I said, sure, there's always things that we can change. People always have suggestions, including myself, on how things can be better or change. There's always something. And that's never going to change. There's always going to be opinions on how to improve the game or how to change the game. And they will all, there's no world where all of those wishes come true. But the game is still fantastic. I love the game. I think it's great. And there's a myriad of goals I have in the game. I want to go in the game and play it and do more of this and that and this and that. And the only thing that restricts me is just time. You know, if you don't know me, if you actually listen all this way and you don't know my channel already, then, you know, I work full time as a side. I have a small child and a family. I don't have that much time to make content. I just make it when I can. And I really enjoy it. Long Dark is like my refuge. It's just so great to play it. It's just, I don't know, it's immersive in a way. And now I almost never play it without making content. But even then, it's great. I really enjoy the Long Dark. It's an amazing game, and it still is. It still is. And I think we should remember that it's not easy to make a game like this, and it's not easy to add so much content by a team like Intellin and still have it be a good game. There'll always be some people that are unhappy regardless, but yeah, this is a great game, and I think the DLC is fantastic as well. Only minor grievances really from my side. I think it's great, but even without the DLC, it's still amazing. It's a really good game. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's all I have to say about it for now, I guess. Really, I love the Long Dark, including its current state, and it will only get better in time. It'll only get better, I think. And if for some reason it doesn't, you can just use time capsule to go back to the time when it was good. And that's it. Yeah. Alright, well, thank you for listening, everyone, and hope you have a great game, and see you another time. Bye bye.